Nice show. I've got a very special guest on our Skype feed right now. Joining me on our 8 o'clock segment, fresh off of his major political announcement, Larry Sharp. He'll be joining us in the 8 o'clock segment. But no stranger to the coalition is joining us right now. Of course, his name is Steve Kerbel. Steve is a serious contender in the run-up to the 2016 Libertarian National Presidential nomination. A temporary illness took him out of the action for a little bit, but he's back to join us tonight. He's back, he's bad, he's on the front lines, the bleeding edge of libertarian warfare, making government, well, safe for no one. In his home state of Colorado, Steve, for the third time, welcome back to the coalition.
Thanks, Pat. It's great to be here once again.
Now, great libertarians don't go away during off-election years. They ruminate, they facilitate, they plot, they plan. I won't do you a snidely worthless mustache, but you get the picture. We don't go to sleep because government, like rust, never sleeps. So in those late night prognostications and discussions, sometimes an idea comes across, as I mentioned in the show's publicity, in the run-up to tonight, that is so simple, yet so brilliant in our constant attack on government largesse that it gives one pause. Because it was one of those ideas that, well, we all should have thought about a long time ago. But again, great libertarians never sleep. Of course, I'm talking about Steve and his group in the Colorado Libertarian movement, their constitutional movement, I'll call it, nascent as it is, to really take the edge off of government fines. Now, we've all, at some point in our life, paid some sort of fine. Some of us more than others, for things that we may or may not be willing to talk about tonight, yeah. However, we're talking tonight about civil fines for the most part, and we, particularly in a state like Rhode Island, from where this show is broadcast, but across the fruited plain, the average citizen, I'll call it death by 1,000 paper cuts. You're routinely subjected to monetary assessments, usually of a confiscatory nature, for seemingly harmless minor infractions of the law. Or as we like to say as libertarians, sir, if it may please the court, or if it may please the king, may I please park in that spot for an extra 5 minutes? Well, no, you may not, because usually under the justification that it's for either A, the children, or B, the public safety, or my favorite, the greater good, there are fines levied. And the question, of course, comes up rhetorically, were they really interested in quote-unquote the public good? No better example, of course, is some of the sin taxes that we run into. Cigarette taxes, where as a nation we've all come to the conclusion that cigarettes are bad for you. They can be really bad for you at times. But as libertarians, we're adults. We believe, again, as I've repeated so many times in the history of the show, that we don't legislate, we don't dictate, we don't judge behavior. As long as that harm accrues to no other individual, we trust you enough as a free man or woman to make your own choices for your own personal lifestyle. We don't think that we need to tell you what to do. So you've got this, I'll call it this legal schizophrenia. Cigarettes, parking fines, behavior that is, in case of cigarettes, perfectly legal. There are taxes on that. So while the same government will spend a large amount of money telling you how bad it is, if they can profit from it, well, all those safety concerns go right out the window. Now let's talk about things like parking fines or late fees or any one of the 1,000 ways that government can reach into your pocket and at the same time not call it a tax. Because as we all know, taxation is in fact theft. What does that make civil fines? So what do we do about these civil fines? And is government really, truly at any level, as the buzzword is, at an organic level, are they really interested in making you safer? Are they really interested in your behavior? Or have they just found another way to feed the beast, the cancer that is in fact large government? And by creating this fake moral construct, the notion that we're interested in you, so we're going to fine you, and to take that money we all know to be well, it's a family show. So Steve, tell us about the thought process and tell us about, again, the genius that you're introducing to the fine people of Colorado.
Well, Pat, thanks for having me on here and being able to spread the word about what we're working on. Yes, it is very simple. It's a real simple concept, and it's something that probably will resonate with the vast majority of people. Let me give you an example. When you're driving along the road, and you may have someone in your car or not, and you see a radar gun pointed at you, you're likely to have one of three reactions. Reaction number one, oh, thank God they're protecting me. Yeah, that's how people react to that one all the time. Number two, oh crap, I hope I'm not speeding because I can't afford another ticket. Right. Or in the case of Colorado, oh boy, it looks like Denver needs money. So what has happened is people know that this hyper enforcement that we've been experiencing, seeing ramping up and up for decades, really has a serious conflict of interest, a lack of credibility, and it's hard for people even to sell it anymore as safety. Mm-hmm. Now, so basically what I thought is the best way to handle this is, okay, you say it's safety, put your money where your mouth is. You don't get paid anymore. And so what happens is, no laws being changed, no penalties being changed, none of it's being taken away. But what happens is we're going to find out what really matters to the folks in control because they're not going to get paid for it anymore. So what Stop the Shakedowns did, and what I did, is I submitted a ballot initiative to the Colorado Secretary of State. We have a hearing at the Capitol next Wednesday. And in essence, what that says is that no government entity whatsoever can receive 1 red cent from a fine generated by any government entity. And so where does that money go? Well, if there's a victim, it goes to the victim. If there's not a victim, as in 99 and 44/100% of the time, right, it's going to go to a charity of your choice, as long as it's a real charity in the state of Colorado that the person being fined doesn't have any interest in it directly or indirectly. So basically what's going to happen is, and it's tax deductible, so it's a real win-win. So basically what's going to happen is, if you do something really bad, I don't think a whole lot of us, well, certainly some of us in our group are going to be, well, no victim, no crime, and I certainly understand that. But the reality is if you're going 90 miles an hour in a school zone, they probably should do something about it. But, if you're going 57 in a 55 zone, that's all about the cash. What I suspect is that type of enforcement with a purely financial motivation is going to stop. And, there are a few towns in Colorado. I'll use Mountain View as an example. Mountain View, Colorado is a small city, the west side of the Denver metro, that is reported to receive 53% of its revenue from traffic fines.
Right.
So there are a number of cities in Colorado that have really large ones. One as high as 93% in a town called Campo, Colorado. And even Morrison, which is a very well-known town, has 60%, all from traffic fines. And people ask me, well, if this passes, what are these cities supposed to do? Well, I'm sorry, if you can't fund yourself without highway robbery, you shouldn't be a city to begin with. So,
let me jump in for a second.
Yeah.
There are, you're telling me that in some cases, upwards of 60% of the town's budget is financed by infractions?
Traffic tickets, yes.
What happens if everybody stops breaking the law?
I guess they're out of luck. And it's funny, I've asked people that question a few times. And I've said, so how would you like to drive your local government crazy today? Everyone go the speed limit.
Wow. Yeah. Now, I'm assuming that these are towns where the voters have taken notice of this and perhaps understand that, you've got the gun of government aimed at you every day, hoping you screw up. What are people's reactions in towns like that to that type of analysis?
Well, I would think some of them are happy because they're not having to pay for it themselves. They're just happy to hit the people from coming out of town. But I think a lot of people just they're not really mindful of it. Mm-hmm.
So it's another example of one of the government's most famous impacts: the slowly boiling lobster. It's happening around them all the time. Yet since it hasn't happened to them personally, they're just quietly leading, well, in some cases, their lives of quiet desperation. and not fully aware, fully cognizant of exactly what government is doing. And again, the coalition, air quotes, on their behalf. Yeah, because again, it's for the taxpayer. Okay, so you've got these towns out there which are just clearly completely out of control. The first thing I'm curious about is, have officials from towns like that reacted to this proposition, or are they just hoping it goes away?
I have not heard any reaction from those people yet. I imagine if they know about it, they're probably hoping it disappears, but this is going to pass. I have to tell you that the people that have been joining me in this very talented, experienced group of people, that are very motivated to make this thing work. And so it's not going away, and it's interesting because a lot of our causes are somewhat challenging because they may not affect the vast majority of people and every voter. But the nice thing about this one is the vast majority of people, far more than half, have received a fine that they didn't think they deserved, and therefore a lot of people believe it's more about the money than about safety or right or wrong. Mm-hmm. And so when people have that mindset and the majority of voters are there, and I believe they are, when we get this thing on the ballot, it's got a great chance of passing.
Now, was I incorrect? This is not a pure constitutional amendment then? This is actually, you're actually looking at a ballot initiative which can then result in regular law. Is that more a proper assessment of the process here?
Yeah, see, Colorado had a very bad law passed last year called Amendment 71. And Amendment 71 made it far more difficult to make a constitutional amendment via the people. Mm-hmm. So to get something on the ballot for a constitutional amendment requires something like 2% of all registered voters in every Senate district in the state of Colorado, which is basically impossible. Right. And so I'm putting this in as a statute, and then I imagine that that means that the legislature can override it. But if they do that, that's going to be political suicide, because if the majority of voters say do this and they say no, then I think they're all going to have a heel in their backsides on the way out the door. So right. I think it's going to work.
So tell me about some of the people who are backing this. I mean, you're going out there and you're building a broad-based coalition?
Yes. Yeah. Well, what I started off by doing is about 6 months ago, I started talking about what I was going to do and started bringing in volunteers, letting people know what was going on. And as it's been going on, more and more people have found out about it through promotion, through media, things like that. They've been jumping on board, and I'm probably not allowed to name the organizations who have already expressed interest in helping, but trust me, they are all across the nation. One of them actually wants to introduce this in every state that they possibly can once we get this passed in Colorado. Actually, other parts of the country, I understand that there's a candidate for the state house in New Hampshire that has added this to their platform. Mm-hmm. There's a city in the state of Washington that is going to introduce this as a city measure. State of Alaska is looking at doing this, a couple of other states, and I was even contacted by Queensland, Australia last week because it's gone that far and they're interested in this as well. So this is a subject that seems to be fairly universal. It touches a lot of people, and government does not like to admit that them keeping the fines that they're taking from you presents a serious conflict of interest, but everybody else knows it does. Right.
I mean, we're still waiting for someone on tape, and maybe in the age of the internet it'll finally happen, for an active duty police officer to come out and admit that yes, he does have a quota. But what give us a range of a display, if you will, of the variety of infractions that you see being covered by this. Is this limited largely to victimless crimes?
Well, let me step back and then I'll answer your question. Mm-hmm. The nice thing is that actually there is a former police officer in Alabama who has agreed to help me with this, who was fired because of the fact his town started instituting quotas. And he made that public. They tried to buddy with him. He wouldn't do it. He kept talking about it, and they fired him. He's going to be doing a lot of media for us and to helping to get this thing passed. So your wish is my command on that last one. But, now let me talk about the type of. This is everything. This is any fine from traffic, regulatory, criminal. Any fine in the state of Colorado will go to a victim first, and in the absence of a victim, will go to a charity. So basically, we're going to make every enforcement arm in the state of Colorado have to fine when somebody actually does something wrong because they can't keep a penny.
And what's astonishing about this idea, this is the term we use often on the coalition is this is an onion issue, because just as a sideline, and this is done routinely here in Rhode Island, one of the more pungent abuses of the state budgeting process is to routinely conflate and inflate, if you will, the projected numbers as part of the budget line item, funds that are going to be collected vis-a-vis the fine process. And again, whether it be civil or criminal. So then the term, I believe, is self-fulfilling prophecy. It's become part of the budget, so then the bureaucrats, the statists must, of course, we all know what they worship, and that is, of course, the church of the budget. And then the word essentially goes out. You're tying governmental agencies' performance effectively into a budget that is based, I guess in some cases in Colorado, almost exclusively on this type of revenue stream, but certainly across the country, municipalities engage in that level of abuse. So at that point in time, you've got a degree of an absence of accountability, if you will, on the performance of an economy to fund the government operations, the performance of the citizen, and also effectively the performance of the state. Now, roll that in at the federal and the state level with all these mandates where if you want to get money for your law enforcement, or if you're looking to further arm your army / state police / local police, it's tied into performance on these levels. You can see how pervasive the rot that occurs is. So this is breathtaking. This and again, I get back to the simplicity of it, yet the genius, because what you're describing is literally a stake in the heart of every governmental body at just about every level in this country, aren't you?
Well, in some ways, yes. In some ways, no. Yeah, definitely the entities that make the money, yeah, it is a stake in the heart. I don't want them to not necessarily function. I just don't want them to abuse their authority. That's been my fight,
right.
Is I have seen in my life a ridiculous amount of abuse of government authority. And so this is a way of leveling the playing field. And I want to add something else, too, as far as police officers. This is not an anti-police measure either. This is pro-police, too. And not necessarily the higher ranks that work at the city council, but the fact is police officers themselves are when they took these jobs, they took it to serve their communities, and their employers have turned them into armed collectors for the state. So I have a feeling that what happens is when this passes, then that relationship between the people and law enforcement that is so strained right now starts to ease up just a bit. Because now we know that they're actually out there to serve, that they can no longer be ordered by their employers to go out and take your money for their own benefit. And so all of a sudden, things start to become more peaceful. Imagine if we passed this and ended the drug war at the same time.
Yeah.
The relationship between the people and law enforcement would be the kumbaya moment, I'll tell you that. Because that's the problem, is these guys are forced to do all of this stuff. Now, yes, of course, you always hear the reports of some people who are really abusing their authority, who are total jerks, but the majority of the people who are doing this, they did this with the desire to help people. Mm-hmm. And when this passes, this is going to actually allow them to do what they wanted to do as well.
Now, the three of the dirtiest words used in conjunction with each other in a libertarian or a civil libertarian's life are civil asset forfeiture.
Right.
Do you envision the proceeds from what has clearly become an out-of-control process from civil asset forfeiture in Colorado? Will those be directed to these funds as well?
Not yet. See, it's funny because when I first designed this, Colorado has a rule, it's called a single issue rule. Mm-hmm. So basically, each ballot initiative can only have a single issue. Mm-hmm. And so originally what I planned to do was to do one, this one I'm talking about now, as well as banning civil asset forfeiture. But it just so happens that thanks to our legislature and governor of Colorado, who passed HB 1313 earlier this year, Colorado now has the most difficult civil asset forfeiture rules in the country because it's completely transparent. And since it's going to be very difficult, expensive, and take a lot of resources to pass these, I figured let's just see what happens with the civil asset forfeiture law that just passed, and let's put all of our resources to passing this one.
Okay. Now, you see, that's interesting because as annoyed and challenged and troubled you may be at times with Colorado. Imagine this, a small state, a beautiful state, a state where the Industrial Revolution literally began, a state who is a testament, if you will, to the successes of capitalism. Now imagine that state has become moribund and is in a death spiral with revenues, where a governor, astonishingly enough, attempted to tax medical cannabis last year. Imagine that same state has no process whatsoever for this type of ballot initiative, and where getting an amendment to their state constitution literally requires the assent and the support of the state legislature, who hypothetically, can be argued, have no interest whatsoever, based on the personal fortunes they've generated, if you will, or political fortunes, with their death grip-like control of said legislature and said legislative process, no interest whatsoever in reforming those laws or the Constitution. And despite the presence of a requirement in the Constitution to vote on having a constitutional convention every, I believe it's 10 years, work overtime to ensure that that doesn't happen, so that they own our Constitution. So here in Rhode Island, we don't even have the tools necessary to do what you're doing. But this is what makes it so much fun, because clearly word of this is going to spread and spread everywhere. Now you've got a website dedicated to it. What is that?
That's called www.stoptheshakedowns.com.
Right. This will be on the 2018 ballot in Colorado?
Yes.
And tell us the process that you have to go through, because this is informative, because some state laws are clearly a patchwork quilt, if you will, of approaches to modifying state law, whether it be constitutionally or statutorily, from the perspective and the efforts of the citizenry. So what is the process in Colorado?
Well, Colorado is actually fairly generous in their ability to let the people legislate, and so that's why it's a great place to start this, unlike Rhode Island, where you're pretty well stuck. But here what we need is that we've got to get it on the ballot. Sorry, Pat.
Yeah, I know.
But basically we have to, I'm going through the process now of getting the verbiage set with the Secretary of State. Once the verbiage and title is set, then it becomes petition time. We have 6 months to get 98,500 and change verified signatures to get this on the ballot. Now, I don't expect, I think they're going to work pretty hard to eliminate as many as they can, which is pretty common for most ballot initiatives.
Oh, yeah.
So the target's to get 150,000 signatures. And we have 6 months to do it, but the snow is coming. And so if we start in August, I'd like to have it done by October, just so that we're not trying to have to go through the winter months, and really try and get it done. If there's a few stragglers, I'm sure we can get them. But really, I'm trying to do it in 3 months, but they give us 6. Once it's past that point, it gets on the ballot, and then becomes the fun. And I think this is going to be a blast, because first of all, you can imagine this is going to be national news, because not only is this people standing up saying, yeah, okay, you can't do this to us anymore. We don't trust you anymore. We think you've abused your authority, and we're going to stop you. But see, there's another part to this, which I think is equally as important. And what that is when people talk legislation, when they talk ballot initiatives, they're usually talking about, how is the state going to find another way to throw me in a cage or take my money, right?
Right.
So now, but this is different. This is something we haven't seen much since the Bill of Rights, where the people stand up and say, no government, I'm putting the tiger back in the cage. You do what we say. This is what's beautiful about this. And this is where a lot of people don't realize they have the power to do this. Most people feel completely helpless. And when we pass this, this is going to prove to the people of the entire country that you are not helpless, that you have the ability to get organized, to do something about it, to be able to take back what really should be yours to begin with. So the battle is going to be great. It's going to be lots of fun. I expect it to be at CNN, national news level, just because everyone here is going to raise a stink about it if they're used to taking the money, and everyone else is going to be laughing at those and saying, of course you're trying to keep your money. Look at the money. Look at our money you're spending on advertising. So it's going to be a blast. It's going to be fun, and I think it's going to be just a massive shot in the arm to the liberty movement nationwide.
Absolutely. I mean, just on an organic and spiritual level, it's again, as I call it, libertarian fabulous. Now, they've managed to lead the nation in a couple of issues, if you will, that are also libertarian fabulous. That tell us about the evolution of the legalization successes in Colorado. How did it come about? Because again, here in Rhode Island, we've just lost another year where the drug war will reign supreme, where government will spend all sorts of money generated by some of the very sources we're talking about tonight, aimed at keeping a natural product out of the hands of adults and legislating their behavior, and simultaneously supporting drug cartels worldwide by subsidizing them effectively through a failed technique of prohibition that, well, I think we realized, what was it, 1929, the Volstead Act? I think we realized, well, hell, we're getting close to 90 plus years of realizing yet prohibition doesn't work. Now, so Colorado's on the bleeding edge of a number of issues. How did marijuana get legalized in Colorado?
Well, Pat, this is a great state. I mean, Colorado really is, as far as the rest of the country goes, a real beacon of liberty. And so we're not afraid to show that the people of Colorado will stand up for what's right. And the legalization of marijuana was one of those examples. It was a grassroots organization. Grassroots, that's pretty funny. Yep. But basically, but it's the people once again standing up saying this is ludicrous, and organizing and working together to pass the medicinal marijuana ability to use that. And then people saw that, well, okay, that's really causing no problems. And so people just stepped up and they did it again. It was a well-organized group, and they got it to pass here. And what's really happened is actually one of the problems we have here due to this is a terribly booming economy.
Damn, hate when that happens.
Yeah, well, part of the problem, I mean, honestly, I would say at least a couple 100,000 people moved here, after the legalization of marijuana. And that, of course, has increased our traffic, has increased our population. Of course, there's people who want to point to that saying, that, well, that's the reason why your crime rate has increased. But in reality, the number of crimes went up because there's more people here. But people always want to blame something for it. But it's worked very, very well. And the people are much calmer, as you can imagine. The actual per capita violent crimes are down significantly. Mm-hmm. We're just dealing with the frustration of a massively, quickly growing state, which is great monetarily for a lot of people and frustrating when you're stuck on the freeway. But the fact is, thank God California, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, Nevada have all legalized it, so maybe they can spread a little west and give us some breathing room here. But the fact is, people are attracted to freedom. They like it. And that's why I say my hat's off to our legislature for approving the civil asset forfeiture transparency bill. And the governor, who felt a lot of pressure from the police union to veto it, and signed it anyway. Right. And so, and here, when we pass this, I think Colorado is going to be a great example for the rest of the country about ways for the people to stand up when we recognize the problem and we say, look, we're going to correct it.
Now, I can't imagine, having been I wouldn't call myself a veteran yet, but thanks to, and I'll give a shout out to, because he'll hear this podcast eventually, to my good friend and someone I admire politically a lot, and of course I'm talking about Chris Thrasher, who ran nationally the movement, and I think on some days by just sheer force of will, willed this nation into giving 50 state ballot access for the Gary Johnson campaign. So having worked with him and seen firsthand the trials, the tribulations, the sheer effort involved in that type of petitioning, what are you guys using for resources? Do you need help? I mean, how does that process work? Give folks kind of an insight into this.
Okay. Well, we have, the staff is growing, the management team is growing, we have a great volunteer coordinator, we have, a good team of people who are very experienced in petitioning. We're hoping that we can get as much petitioning done through a volunteer basis, but we've had some large organizations stand up to offer to help us as well, as far as to give us some people at a very low expense to knock door to door for a couple months to get this all done. I mean, the thing about politics is it all comes down to two things: people and money. Right. And so and that's the thing is if the cause is something that's interesting enough to people, they open up their checkbooks. Right. If it's not, then it kind of dies. But this one, I think that as it gains momentum, I think people are going to be more and more interested in helping us get where we need to go. And so certainly the beginning is the hardest time, and I've been making phone calls myself to try and get people to open up their checkbooks to help us get started. And so we get the process moving. But we'll do some things along the way, like some money bombs. But the fact is just, it'll probably cost $1 to $2 million to pass this initiative. I'd say the getting it on the ballot will be, typically runs $300,000 to $700,000 to get it on the ballot. But we've got a plan to get it on the ballot for $100,000. Just because we have so many volunteers and so many people that want this to pass, we might be able to do that for $100,000. So the rest is all going to go to advertising. And we're going to advertise heavily, and I think that one of the advantages we'll have for finance is that because we'll be setting a precedent, that it's not just going to be contributions coming from Colorado. I think a lot of people around the country are interested in seeing us pass this, so they're going to do what they can to help us as well. So that's why I think it's all going to come together real well. And my first step is Wednesday at the Capitol and see what they're going to do. But so far they've been very cordial, and we'll see what their response is going to be as far as, are they going to make this possible, or are they going to throw up every roadblock in the world to stop us? So we'll find that out next week.
I have a feeling and again, I'm not sensitive to the internal politics of the state of Colorado. It'll be interesting once this hits the news cycle hard. The governor's reaction to that and of Colorado, and what you see from, I'll call it, the political firmament. What's been the reaction, if you've had much yet, from the not-for-profit community? I imagine certain organizations have got to be doing headstands over this.
Well, I haven't called a lot of the larger ones yet, as far as this people like United Way and the kind of the general large charitable organizations. Some of the smaller ones are aware, and they're very interested. Of course, some of the political organizations are the ones who are on it right now, because this is still fairly early in the process. But I will be reaching out to many charities in the state to see if they can help us get this done as well, because it kind of helps everybody. So we'll see. Now, they may not be allowed to do it depending on their legal structure, but that's part of the goal.
Right. So I mean, and now let's take that next step. Because as we sort of explore this issue, and by the way, if you're just joining me, Steve Kerbel from the great state of Colorado, who, as I like to describe, is truly libertarian fabulous, is taking some time between the election cycles to really engage in what I call one of the more patriotic aspects of government service imaginable. That is, as the volunteer advocate, as someone who takes an idea, runs with it, and does things for the greater good. That's, in the libertarian movement, we talk about voluntarism. That's a very different concept. We also talk about volunteerism. Voluntarism, if I could define it, and I'm sure the folks in the radical contingent who might be listening to this now or later will probably correct me. Feel free, by the way, at Twitter, at @coalition_radio. Feel free to send me that. But I conceive of voluntarism as this. If you're a voluntarist, you believe that you voluntarily consent to be governed. A consent that you as a free man or woman have the ability to withdraw at any one time. Tonight we're talking about, of course, volunteerism. If you believe in smaller government, if you believe in the elimination, if you will, of the safety net to be replaced by private acts of charity, then quite frankly, there are some wonderful private charitable organizations here and across the country and in Colorado that are worthy of your efforts and are far better, far more motivated at directing your dollars efficiently into, whether it be medical research, whether it be any one of a number of issues that exist out in the world today that require correction or help. The beauty of this is that you've extended volunteerism up and down the food chain. You, and again, please correct me because this is also new to me, do you as the offender, if you will, have the right to dictate or choose which charity is going to be the recipient of this?
You sure do. Yeah, as long as you don't have a personal interest in it.
Okay.
Because a lot of people came back, our group, libertarians are a smart group and sharp group of people. And so they're never going to let you get away with anything without questioning you.
Right.
And so
questioning.
Well, we're
questioning.
going to make absolutely sure that we understand every molecule of what we're talking about. And that's a good thing, because see what a lot of these discussions have done with people of all views within our group has really helped hone my resolve and my plan to what makes the most sense. So, even if I don't agree with a comment, I usually try and take it into consideration. So basically, what's going to happen here is it's going to be given to people. Oh, they were asking me about the, what happens if somebody sets up their own 501c3 to give the fine to themselves. So basically, I said, well, you can't do that. And actually, due to that suggestion, I changed the verbiage of the law and included the clause saying that you cannot have a financial interest in that charity, either directly or indirectly. Mm-hmm. And so basically, those kinds of discussions from people I know and have engaged in these conversations have helped me hone this into something that makes a lot more sense.
Right. And let's take it to the next level. Charities in most states now are required to perform some type of disclosure at some level as to, I'll call it, the efficiency of their fundraising. So you'll have a charity that in one case 90% of their money might actually go towards the cause that they're quote unquote dedicated to helping, which is wonderful. Then you've got some cases, and there's been some national scandals, where companies where as little as 20 to 30% are actually going toward those charities. Now let's think of the ramifications of this. By injecting this whole new revenue source into private charity, you are effectively creating a competitive marketplace for charities, because folks then, I believe, my personal opinion, will take the next step and say, okay, listen, if I got to pay this $500 fine, I want it to go somewhere where it's going to count. Now, my personal issue, I may have lost family members due to Alzheimer's. And my understanding of the National Organization supporting Alzheimer's research is that they do one whole hell of a wonderful job doing it. So that's where my nickels got as you say in the car business, my $500, my do-re-mi is going to them, because I'm convinced. Now take the Salvation Army, again, a wonderful organization from my personal experience. There are folks who are dedicated to doing the right thing as literally a mission. So you're going to have an entire group of people who will say, okay, those folks do the most with the money, that's where I'm going. As we go step by step through the issues here, because we're talking about literally tens of millions of dollars, aren't we, in a state like Colorado?
Hundreds, probably over 100.
Over $100 million. So imagine you're taking, and this is the potential for this nationwide, in a state like Colorado, which I'll call a mid-sized to slightly larger state because of the newfound and growing sophistication of their economy, you're taking a state where you've got $100 million that it can all of a sudden be aimed like a cannon at some of the most challenging issues facing America. Then let's take it to the next level. And I'm going to run this by Larry Sharp, who's going to be later on the show, and take a state like New York, where thanks in part to their physical size, the sophistication of their economy, and just their sheer grotesque obsession with literally bleeding their citizens on a day-by-day basis with, confiscatory is not the term for New York state taxes. All right? Imagine that money being aimed like a cannon at some of society's ills, being literally channeled into organizations who are being picked by the citizenry for their own efficiencies and their ability to get things done. The change almost overnight, and I'm not trying to hype this, I think the potential ramifications of this are staggering. This is one of those, forgive my hyperbole, but this is one of those change the world moments.
It is. Well, imagine what happens if everybody decided to donate to homeless. And so basically, let's say you got $100 million you can give to government that they'll use to try and squeeze more cash out of you. Or what if that all went to homeless, right? Do you think that might make a dent in the problems of the homeless? Heck yeah, it would. And so the other things I would probably do is speaking to your comment about the efficiency of charities. After we get this thing passed, I think I'll be able to probably have some availability to reach media then too. And I'm going to be encouraging people to study because there are websites out there where people have to report in their charities. And so I'm going to be steering them to those websites to be able to make sure that they have as much knowledge as possible, that they're just not giving it to somebody to pad their wallet, that they're giving it to who they believe in, and hopefully someone who's much more efficient with the money. Right.
All right. And now let's take it to the next logical extreme. Because this is the gift that keeps on giving, isn't it, Steve?
It is. It really is.
Now, imagine private money being, I'll use that analogy, being directed like a cannon at homelessness. What happens then when you suddenly realize that state services which are also being paid for by the taxpayer, aren't as necessary because, quite frankly, private charities are getting, I don't want to, I'll never say the word overwhelmed, but all of a sudden, private charities I'm besides myself. What was it? I'm very private charities who, in many cases, do a far better job at solving a problem because they're, again, this is where you get into the governmental, I'll call it the circle of life. Many private charities are actually interested, motivated, and some would even say dedicated to solving problems, as opposed to perpetuating the need to create problems so as to maintain one's level of funding. There are actually charities out there, Steve, who will be perfectly happy if once they solve their problem to simply pack up and, well, go away. Now, so when you look at the, I sound like a 13-year-old approaching puberty. When you look at, what can happen when all of a sudden you don't need an extra 40 government bureaucrats. And listen, I've said it before, I will never take shots at government employees who are on the street level doing the work of the Lord, whether it be social workers or things like that. But how many more, oh my God, how many more $160,000 a year bureaucrats will have to go away because we don't need them anymore?
Well, it's interesting. It's not, if you put yourself in the shoes of a voluntarist, it's not perfect, but it's on the right track. I mean, because the government is still coming down on people and enforcing some laws, a lot of which shouldn't exist to begin with. But the fact is, it does really dig into a lot of services that are paid for with taxes, and probably addresses them much more effectively through private charities. So, yeah, who knows where this could end? I mean, it could get to the point where there's enough money out there to help anybody who needs it without having to pay homage to the government. But that's a pretty big dream and probably very, very far away.
Well, okay, so then let's circle back to one of the primary benefits, if you will, and I want to explore this. How aggressive will government then be in inventing all these new fines and inventing all these new excuses to enforce or to create or to self-imagine these, I'll call it the crisis du jour, when in fact they're not going to be the beneficiary. If in real sense they're going to have to expend money, which will be a smaller pool of money, more efficiently to attack real world problems because you're simply cutting the funds to attack the imaginary ones.
Well, you know what we're doing, Pat?
Yeah.
Force is not one of our friends when we're talking about government, but when people force the government, that's a different story. And in this case, the people are forcing the government to act in good faith. How about that?
The ground is shaking here in Providence, Rhode Island. Somewhere a group of bureaucrats just doubled over in agony, and it wasn't from the shrimp cocktail over at the State House that they did it. In fact, I think I see some likely National Governor Association types walking in front of me. Their eyes are ever cast downward to their Twitter feed. They're wearing expensive suits, a little bit too well coiffed for the streets of La Prave here, and it looks like they've got taxpayer money to spend. So they don't know what evil lurks here within this building. This may seem like just merely a public service announcement going on. They're not quite aware of how it's going to impact them. So what is coming up then? What's the next steps? And is there a mechanism yet set up so that folks can donate to your cause and to help support it?
Yes, actually, the website will have a link in the next day or so through PayPal to be able to donate. And so I encourage you to check that out in the next few days and be able to do that. Of course, you can always send a check. The website, the address is on the website if you'd like to send a check. And actually, that's better if you do because then we don't have to pay discount rates and more money actually goes to the cause itself. So, but yeah, this is we're definitely gearing up. We're definitely about ready to get things in high speed. And we can use all the help we can get from all across the country.
I don't think there isn't anyone within the sound of this station that hasn't at some point paid a fine. So imagine, if you will, and this is, of course, the lessons learned during some national campaigns over the last few years. In a situation like this, I always ask people to remember the hashtag of the show, which is take it personally. So if how many millions of Americans have paid some ridiculous, confiscatory, ill-placed, poorly motivated, poorly designed government fine, I don't know, within the last day or so. And the notion that they could, in a sense, self-invest. Because, folks, I'll frame this in a really greedy, kind of personally motivated construct here. Send this cause $5 or $10, and if 500,000 of you do it, you'll literally change not only their world in Colorado, but believe me, this I can't think of a single government initiative, and I'll go back to Proposition, what was it, Proposition 2 in California back in the day that started the whole tax relief movement. I can't think of a single proposition aimed at state and local government that has more potential to change the playing field on so many different levels in the government / taxpayer / citizen relationship. I can't think of one. And, folks, feel free at Coalition Radio to send us suggestions or to challenge me on this notion, or really to make suggestions or challenge us in general on the premise here. I see no ill here. Can you think of a single negative side effect to this?
Only if you are used to receiving the money, yeah.
So unless you're that, and when I back in the days of Occupy, people talked about the 1%. In my personal opinion, the 1% really has become the professional government class. And again, I'm not talking about the social worker or the policeman on the beat. I'm talking about that mid-level, nameless, faceless bureaucrat who usually occupies the role of project manager or something purposely vague like that, who makes large sums of money with no real accountability. I mean, in a very large sense, and again, forgive my hyperbole, if you're old enough, you remember Brezhnev era Soviet Union, the only thing missing are the special stores that only people at a certain governmental level can get to. At this point in time, that nameless, faceless bureaucrat is so insulated from the consequences of day-to-day life through his or her personal connections, salary level, benefits, and near lifelong guarantee of employment that exists nowhere in the dreaded private sector, that you'd be hard-pressed to find a group of people in this country who are truly more privileged. Yet, unlike, say, the capitalist who maybe invented a new operating system or a new drug, has so little to show for the cause for this largesse. They exist really at no one's benefit, for no reason, and to no greater end for the American people. So to me, the beauty of this whole setup is, again, my words, it's really a dagger at the heart of government as we know it today. Steve, fabulous idea. We've only got a minute or two left, but this seems like this is going to be all-consuming for you for the next year or two. You actually have a business life, don't you? You still have a business to run, and you're you're gainfully employed. How much of a patriot is someone who manages to take himself away from his family, his business, to really do an act that's purely patriotic? Because other than yourself, whatever fines you may have to pay in the future, you really there's no personal benefit for you, is there? This is really you doing something because it's the right thing to do.
I'm doing this because the system is broken, because too many people believe they have the right to abuse their authority at the expense of the citizens, against the businesses, and it needs to stop. It's wrong, and the people need to take back control of what they should have control of to begin with, and it's gotten so transparent that now is the time to fix it. It's obvious to everyone that the government's out fleecing people for their own financial reasons, and that's not why this country was designed.
And that is why my friend Steve Kerbel is in fact Libertarian fabulous. Steve, thanks so much for joining us. Give us the site again one more time so that folks can go right to it and find ways to support your efforts.
It's www.stoptheshakedowns.com. We also have a presence on Facebook, stoptheshakedowns.com. But just remember, that it's pretty easy to remember because it is a shakedown when they come to get the money from you. That's exactly what they're doing. They're coming to shake you down. So that's why you should remember, stop the shakedowns.
Great. Steve Kerbel, Libertarian Fabulous, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm hoping I'm going to see you in person this year. I certainly don't want to wait to New Orleans to see you, but let us know what we can do to spread the word.
I appreciate it, and thank you. You've already done a lot for having me on today, and I appreciate it very much, Pat. Thank you.
All right, folks, Steve Kerbel, stoptheshakedowns.com. I think if I can approach the bench, Your Honor, we have done a great job of breaking out really the astonishing potential for the notion of redirecting government funds to private charity. We're going to be posting this, of course, on our YouTube page at Coalition Radio and at facebook.com/thecoalitionradio, and of course at coalitionradio.us. Folks, we've got a special guest, kind of a surprise guest that's just joining us. Have a great summer. I'll be in touch with you.